They say that the PlayStation is dead. That's certainly something I see plenty of online, and it would appear that at the very least, it smells funny. It shambles around like Emil from Robocop after his unfortunate encounter with a vat of toxic waste, the continuous stripping away of flesh representing whichever horrendous announcement has happened today. The constant claims of huge profits paired with hundreds of job losses as another studio gets closed, another drive towards promoting the giant brain-eroding slot machine, proclaiming the end of physical media. Yeah, it's all pretty terrible. And so we lay puzzled as we backtrack to earlier times. The times of 25 years ago, because I'm afraid to say that the PlayStation 2 is old. You've probably been trying to put that to the back of your mind, haven't you? Thinking that surely it was just yesterday that you brought that machine home or played it for the first time, that it can't possibly have been a quarter of a century ago. But I'm afraid it was that long ago. Not that it matters awfully much because it's still bloody good. The PS2 is one of my absolute favourites, not just for the legendary games. It's fair to say I have a few kicking around, but for the creativity that it represented. A time when you could seemingly get any sort of odd little game going, and you could get it on a disc. A world between the AAA and the indie, the land of mid-range, filled with esoteric titles and efforts that may have flaws but have plenty of positives too. Character, charm, heart. Great stuff. And today we're celebrating it with a long overdue PS2 Top 100. Now of course I make no claims to this being anything other than my own Top 100 games. It's not something that would ever be fully complete, especially seeing as I still think there's a plethora of games out there that are waiting to be discovered, and it's surely something that will produce disagreement, cries about the inclusion or lack thereof of some game or other that, oftentimes, I simply haven't got around to playing yet. But then, that's all part of the fun. There's thousands of PS2 games out there after all, plenty enough for everyone's list to wildly differ in some way, and that's one of the reasons why this may be the best console of them all. Anyway, that's enough waffle. We have a list of 100 PS2 games to get through, and it starts now. What better way to kick things off than with a man who is, most indubitably, the law? Seeing as the PS2 was still part of the time when we got loads of licensed games, there's a good few titles here that also appeared on my licensed games list from a couple years back, and Dredd vs. Death here is the first of them. Rebellion's effort is by far the best Judge Dredd game. Indeed, it could be argued that it's the only actually good one, and it's an FPS where the play itself is generally solid, although the main fun does come from patrolling Mega City 1 and nicking pretty much anyone you see doing anything. If they breathe air, you can collar them and chuck them in the cubes for the rest of their natural life. Remember, the first rule of dystopia is to exercise absolute power. The second rule is to have fun. There's a bit of humour in all this. Rebellion keeps things very faithful to 2000 AD. They owned it by this point, after all. And it's all wrapped up in a perfectly serviceable shooter. Nice.
Judges. Give it up, Perp. 10 years, lawbreaker.
The first of a handful of wrestling games is up, and it's Shut Your Mouth. I could have included Just Brin It, and perhaps should have, if only for the ultra cheesy commentary and rubbish storylines, but Shut Your Mouth is the point where the SmackDown series took a bit of a step up. Everything's much bigger and better, especially the wrestlers. It's a big stepping stone that leads to an all-time classic that obviously we're going to see later, although Shut Your Mouth mainly gets an entry for the ridiculous things you can do, something I spent a lot of time screwing around with back in the day. This is the game where you can climb all the way up to the top of the SmackDown fist and perform absolutely incredible bumps and stunts. That's something you can't do in Here Comes the Pain, by the way, and there's a few other things you can take huge bumps off, such as the Rebellion Titantron and the King of the Ring Throne. I had a lot of fun with all this, and it's enough for Shut Your Mouth to get its own entry. Our first proper sports game and, well, it's Sensible Soccer 2006. Normally a game with this name would be significantly higher in a list of mine, but while Sensi 2006 isn't exactly on the same level as the original Amiga titles, I do still enjoy it. It doesn't necessarily play like Sensi, which is a disappointment. Hell, it actually plays more like Kuju's club football games, those titles that had about 50 different versions on the shelves with different teams on the front. Ordinarily that wouldn't be a good thing at all, and yet Sensi 06 still plays a speedy game of football, and the cartoony graphics actually make for a decent update to the original style. The computer's intelligence can occasionally be iffy, especially when it comes to the goalkeeper, but it still allows you to put some quick moves together and score cool goals. Basically, even if it's not fully faithful to the original Sensi, this is the sort of flawed yet charming and entertaining mid-range footy game that we just do not see anymore, and haven't seen for nigh on 20 years now, and that makes me want to give it a place. The PS2 did perhaps get the slightly shorter end of the stick when it came to Star Wars games. There's no Rogue Squadron or Knights of the Old Republic to speak of, after all. However, there is Battlefront 2. Okay, I suppose you could say the Xbox had this one too, but I played this game here, so hey ho. Anyway, this is simple stuff that is designed to be played with people. You pick an arena, fight to get control of it, occasionally bring a big old special character into play, fly the odd vehicle around. It's Battlefield type action with a big twist from that there galaxy far, far away, and unlike the much more bloated and utterly miserable revival of the series that happened a few years ago, it is something that's actually going to stick in the mind for a good while yet. Sticking with Electronic Arts, NBA Street is the first sports game by them on the list. So why this one? Well, in this generation they tended to fare better with the more creative and arcadey games, such as this one, as opposed to their more traditional simulations. In other words, the games that they released under the EA Sports Big, or more accurately, EA Sports Big label. There's a lot more fun to be had playing this than you would get from NBA Live 2004 or whatever, mainly because it's just a much more simple and slimmed down experience that's all about doing the cool moves, timing a nice pass to someone in the air for a big dunk. It's a cool basketball game where the focus is simply on playing basketball, which is quite refreshing compared to the sort of games you get nowadays. Don't forget about the big old game breaker bar, of course. Once you fill that up, that's where the really big dunks happen. It's not quite at NBA Jam's level, but it's most definitely got game. MMA games still tend to be thin on the ground even today, but a whole bunch of them popped up in the early noughties as the sport grew in popularity around the globe. And here we have Anchor's Pride Fighting Championships game. Pride is the sort of thing that produces wistful, bitter salt tears of nostalgia in the eyes of some MMA fans, and this game's full of glorious names. Sakuraba, Silva, Shamrock, Nogueira, Vochanchin, Don Fry. Mind you, I get the biggest kick out of playing as Alexander Otska, seeing as he's got all sorts of pro wrestling moves in his arsenal. Anyway, the Pride FC game makes for a pretty good attempt at the sport. Very satisfying strikes, a nice grappling system that mixes up button bashing and timing pretty well, something that's engaging whether you're up on your feet or on the ground. You could have some really cool back and forths with this one. I do believe there's a couple of other MMA games by Anchor that didn't leave Japan, including sequels to this one and K1 games, but this is the one that came out in the West, and it is very cool. Here's a question. Are you a brave enough Chris to lead a resistance against the evil Soviets? IO Interactive's Freedom Fighters poses that exact question. As good as Hitman and its ilk generally are, it's a good reminder of the various other things that IO used to put out. A tactical third-person game set in an alternative timeline where the Ruskies dropped the first nuke on Germany and the Cold War never really ended. And now you, Chris, plumber extraordinaire, must become a part of the resistance that forms after they invade and take over New York City. It's a cool plot and a very nice bit of blasting action. It's got a nice progression where you do actually feel like a bit of a leader, kinda similar to what you find in the Red Faction games. Again, this isn't exactly a PS2 exclusive, and you can get it on both Xbox and GameCube, but it's a game that I played on here first, and I have quite fond memories of it, and happily playing it again for this list was not a pain in the arse at all. Fight Night is one of those sports series that definitely got better with each instalment, and Round 2 on PS2 is where it definitely kicks up a notch. It doesn't necessarily have the same amusing knockouts that you find in 2004, where you can hit some poor sod another half dozen times before they actually go down, but the presentation's a whole lot better. They've really got to grips with the total punch control on the right analog stick. It feels like defense and evading shots is something that's actually worth doing. Connecting with a good shot or combo feels so much better. I mean, it took another generation for EA to really deliver on this one, with Round 4 and Champion basically being the best boxing games there's ever been, but Round 2 is still pretty damn good. I should note that even though Round 3 is also on PS2, and I did just say that the series improved with every instalment, I mainly played that one on 360, so I think of it as being more from that generation.
He's tagging his...
A fighting game involving musicians of any description sounds like something that should be a recipe for disaster. The sort of game idea that could only come at the afters, most likely at 3 AM in someone's kitchen. But happily, whoever chopped up the idea to make a fighting game starring Def Jam's rappers also thought it would be good if Aki got on board, and so we end up with two smashing titles. Fight for NY is obviously coming, but Def Jam Vendetta is also a cracker. The core of the series is more obvious here, and it doesn't have the same environmental antics that really make Fight for NY come to life, but this is basically another wrestling game from one of the best studios in the business, the guys who ruled the N64 with the likes of WCW NWO Revenge, WWF No Mercy, and Virtual Pro Wrestling 2. A great wrestling game is a great wrestling game, whether it stars Steve Austin, Sting, Kenta Kobashi or Ghostface Killer, and Vendetta is a fine title in the classic Aki tradition, with a bit more focus on knocking out the opponent once you get enough momentum to use the Blaze move. Very cool, and it sets up something even better later down the road. Shadow of Rome is something of an oddity, a rather late PS2 game that does one thing very well while also doing another thing not very well at all. Generally people remember it for all the good things, that being absolutely rip-roaring combat in the arenas of the Colosseum, grabbing weapons left and right, dismembering your foes, riding chariots about, saluting the crowd at every opportunity to get all the salvos you can, like you're some bloodthirsty ancient Roman influencer. The combat in Shadow of Rome is fabulous, and the Roman setting's always going to be a positive for me, as I'm a bit of a geek for this particular period. And then, of course, there are the stealth sections. That's the bit nobody likes, where you're playing as some dork who unfortunately cannot dismember people with a sword, meaning that those parts of the game are somewhat cumbersome and boring. Still, you take the rough with the smooth on PS2. Shadow of Rome certainly is not the only game of its time to feature bad enforced stealth sections, and there's plenty of good things going on to make up for it. Oh, speaking of stealth, Manhunt is kind of a tricky blighter. Rockstar's first game on this list is by a long distance their darkest, the one where you play as a condemned man who's been given another chance at life just so that he can cause the death of many others at the direction of the voice in his ear, who sees him as the snuff film industry's next Tom Cruise. The mood is very dark indeed, a concept that's truly wild, and only mocked a little bit by Rockstar choosing to name the main character James Earl Cash, which is one of the most hilarious names for a protagonist in the history of gaming. Manhunt does such a great job with its atmosphere, its setting, the unsettling "do it" in your ear whenever you're about to insert a shard of glass into a scumbag's thorax. Actually playing it doesn't quite reach the same heights, of course. The stealth gameplay most certainly has issues when it comes to being bloody frustrating and difficult in all the wrong places. And yet all the things that Manhunt does exceptionally right do make you want to keep at it. Well, after all that misery, we need a little play in the sandbox, and our first go at an open world comes in the shape of True Crime Streets of LA. This was a very bolshy game indeed. The repeated jabs at Rockstar most certainly weren't subtle, as if Nick Kang's Zool was punching Tommy Vercetti's Sonic on the front cover of a magazine. It did try to position itself as a GTA beta, that's for sure. Now, True Crime was not a GTA beta, but it is still very good in a lot of departments. Now, truthfully, I couldn't tell you bugger all about the story in this game, as the main thing I did was cruise around the streets the first opportunity I got, sorting out the random crimes that constantly spawn. You use various moves to do this, and you can also arrest suspects as opposed to simply filling them full of lead. Doing this is great fun, and most certainly a good way to kill an hour. Similar, I suppose, to another game in this list that we've seen much later on. I imagine I would have also enjoyed this game if I'd ever properly engaged with the story, although an absolutely not arsed Christopher Walken wasn't exactly a good starting point there. But then, the joy of a good sandbox game is that you don't actually have to do any of that in order to have fun. Forget about sandboxes. What we've got now is a straight line packed full of enemies, everything from simple grunts to the whopping big bosses, and we gotta shoot them all. Such old school run and gunning can only mean one thing. This is Contra Shattered Soldier from 2002. At the time, this was seen as a return to Contra's roots, a return to the more traditional two-dimensional movement following the previous generation's 3D games, Legacy of War and the Contra Adventure. It's a faithful return in basically every regard. If you've ever played Alien Wars or Hardcore, then you already know pretty well how this game's going to play, and it's also faithful in the most important department because, oh boy, this game is a hard mother. You will die a hell of a lot, but then a Contra game wouldn't exactly be worth bothering with if it was a piece of cake. Oh yeah, and there's also some kind of plot too, where Bill's recruited out of jail and Lance is now the main villain, and honestly, who the bloody hell cares? This isn't Metal Gear Solid, let's go mow down some alien scum. Even if the polygons here can't hold a candle to proper 2D sprites, Shattered Soldier is still a fine entry in the series. If it's single-player FPS action you want, well, I do have to say, the PS2 wasn't necessarily the best place for that. Don't get me wrong, there are a couple of excellent FPS titles on PS2 that we will be seeing later, but it's definitely not beating the Xbox in that department. I mean, I may beat the PS2's drum, but I'm not stupid. Volition's Red Faction is one of the bigger names in the world of FPS on PS2, and yeah, it's good. I enjoyed it a lot back then, for sure. It is a bit simplistic when it comes to the actual shooting, seeing as it mainly involves locking onto enemies as soon as you see them and firing, but it's got some other things going for it. There's the destruction aspect, where you can put big holes in basically anything, and even use that to travel around and enter new areas. Or the story, which is actually quite engaging, and ended up servicing a few games in the end. I love how Ultor also ended up being a big part of Saints Row, and how everything's completely turned on its head by the time we get to Red Faction Guerrilla, which is, of course, the best game in the whole series. I suppose the main reason why the original Red Faction is on here is because we wouldn't have Guerrilla without it, but it's a nice hit of nostalgia. It also has a fine multiplayer mode, good deathmatch action, and you can chuck bots into the fray if you'd rather play this mode as opposed to the big campaign. Lots of fun. It's always great when a game that is undoubtedly weird as all hell is also actually worth playing, and that's absolutely the case with 2001's Mr. Mosquito. Naturally, this one originally hails from Japan, but Eidos picked it up for release in the West under its Fresh Games label, a label specifically created for Japanese imports, including other oddities such as Mad Maestro. As the title suggests, you play as a mosquito, and unlike other video game animals, you do not have some grand adventure to go on. You will meet no anthropomorphic friends, you will not collect any rings or gems or bananas or whatever. There is no home planet to save. You simply do what a mosquito is born to do, and that's suck in blood. The Yamada family are the objects of your attention, and you drain blood out of them in various rooms, ideally without being noticed. The last thing you want is to be swatted, although if you do end up engaging in a battle, you can hit pressure points in order to relax your target. And hey, it is also worth exploring the rooms a little bit, as you may find items kicking around. Playing as a mosquito is actually very cool, it turns out. It's quite novel, but at its heart, you've just got a fun little game of flying. Certainly a hell of a lot better than Demolition Girl.
Oh dear. Somebody come! Hush! Hush! Yes!
In the big battle of FIFA versus PES, there is no question what series was on top in this generation. Pro Evo was king, and the FIFA games from the PS2 were crap. With the exception of FIFA Street. It's another one from the EA Sports big line, and it's a similar deal to NBA Street. You set a target score for the two teams, you use all the tricks you can to beat your opponents, you try and score magnificent goals, headers, bicycle kicks, scorpion kicks, all sorts, and of course there is a game breaker meter that you gradually fill up, eventually using it to unleash a super duper shot that is basically guaranteed to split the old onion bag wide open. The sort of music you would hear coming out of some scallywag's Nokia on the bus is played at max volume throughout, and the commentary is provided by Harvey from the So Solid crew, who is not shy of telling you that the shot you somehow managed to shank in from 2 yards after the opposing goalie parried it is most definitely deserving of a rewind, replay, replay, replay. Sure, it is a bit cheesy on the presentation front, and it can be a bit loud and obnoxious, but it does kind of feel like playing one of those cool Nike or Adidas adverts where all the top footballers get together for some Joga Bonito action. Definitely better than playing The Mission on PS1.
Beautiful sight and a beautiful goal. Who wants to replay?
Next up, it's a Curry game. If you think that we're about to go back to the 2nd century AD in China, you would be right. However, this is not Dynasty Warriors. At least not yet. This is Dynasty Tactics 2 from 2003, the second and final entry in a series that was largely utterly ignored, where the usual Three Kingdoms antics are represented with some strategy. You play out the Yellow Turban Rebellion and many other stories by moving your units around the field, using a whole load of different abilities and chaining them together, pre-gaming inside cities by chatting to residents and deploying the odd spy. It's a very nice package, like the battle system from Romance of the Three Kingdoms, only with a lot more depth. Curry did some pretty lovely stuff on PS2, and this is but the first example from them that we're going to see. Definitely my favourite turn-based strategy game on the console. The Getaway from 2002 is a very interesting game indeed. Much like True Crime, it's certainly got a bunch of flaws. The combat and generally walking around is a royal pain in the arse, and the Guy Ritchie-esque London gangsters plot perhaps hasn't aged incredibly well. But, as with other open world games, it offers great opportunities to screw around in a way that is actually unique to this title. The best thing to do in The Getaway is to quickly unlock the free roam, just use a cheat, and drive around what is basically a virtual time capsule, a very accurate picture of London in the early 2000s, constructed out of tens of thousands of pictures that were taken on Sony Mavicas, you know, the digital camera that saved your photos to a floppy disk. The HUD-less interface especially helps a lot as you visit the landmarks, go around the streets and see all sorts of shops and chains that aren't there anymore, pick out the restaurants and pubs that are still kicking around today, see all the adverts, find out what was on at the cinema. That's what is especially great about playing The Getaway in 2026, and it's the sort of thing that would never happen today. Imagine all the bloody licenses you would need to get to show off just the brands alone. The actual game was okay enough back then, and nowadays it's basically a Domesday book that has the added bonus of guns, the filth, "Where's my son, you fat bastard?" and "Stop! I need your details!" This is possibly more nostalgic than any other game in this whole list. As if we couldn't get any more English round here, we've got a cricket game. This perhaps shouldn't come as a surprise. I highly enjoy Brian Lara Cricket 96 and that made my Mega Drive Top 100, so why shouldn't there be a space for this also very good PS2 edition? It plays quite similarly to the old 16-bit title with buttons for careful ground drives and slogging, a whole load of different options in the field for positioning your men at all the slips and points, the confidence meters that represent the mental battle between bowler and batsman, meandering monologues from Tony Gregg on commentary that are coaxed out of him by David Gower, various classic matches where you get to play in black and white and face legends like W.G. Grace, Fred Truman and Viv Richards. A lot of love for cricket went into this game, and it's a great update of the audiogenic original.
That went straight down the fieldsman's throat. The batsman will be kicking himself.
Let's have a look at that from another angle.
Tenchu's height of popularity was most definitely back on PS1, but Acquire's series was actually around for quite some time, and I've also got a lot of love for 2003's Tenchu Wrath of Heaven, the third game. It'll certainly be very familiar to anyone who's touched the first title, the first mission even being a bit of a play on the legendary Punish the Evil Merchant starting mission from Stealth Assassins, although there's also a nice dollop of plot with Rikimaru now seemingly stuck in a wholly different time, everything jumping back and forth. But yes, it's the same nice and fluid stealth action filled with grappling ropes, stealth kills, and some very cheesy dialogue and voice acting. Just the sort of thing you want out of a mid-range gaming series, and pretty much the exact thing that Tenchu provided through 3 whole console generations, even though admittedly less and less people bought it as time went on. More cool non-GTA open world action is here, and this time it's Scarface, The World Is Yours. The main pull of this one is basically in the title. You get to play as Tony Montana, strutting around 1980s Miami in an alternate timeline where he actually survived the big shootout at his mansion, and now he's got to reclaim his empire. Tony Montana does drug deals, interacts with a ridiculously stacked cast of characters filled with voices from the original film and then some, even if Al Pacino himself is only here in likeness, and, well, he swears. A lot. The game even has a dedicated swearing button, which is enough for it to warrant a place on the list all by itself. It even has a purpose, seeing as you use it to taunt and up your balls meter. Mechanically, it's also a much better game than both True Crime and the Getaway, so it's definitely deserving of a spot regardless of the balls meters and the endless stream of shits and fucks. Fine work.
Don't fuck with me. Hey lady, how'd you doing?
Me?
Fucking cabrón. This is my kind of place. Why'd you fucking walk like that, man?
You ain't making much sense, but...
Time Splitters, another quite prominent series of PS2 first-person shooters. Well, the first one was a PS2 exclusive anyway. Time Splitters 2 was not, but it's my favourite of the trilogy, and so it's on here. In general, Time Splitters has a couple of big things going for it. The first is the multiplayer action, which is arguably the strongest in any PS2 FPS, and that shouldn't be a surprise because of the second thing. This is what the team behind GoldenEye and Perfect Dark did next after they left Rare and formed Free Radical. Even if you didn't know that factoid, it would kind of be obvious just from playing this, and hell, I've certainly not got any problem with more console FPS action in that vein. Hell, the first mission here even takes place on some Siberian dam filled with Russians, just to really ram the association home. Although naturally there's lots of other time zones to jump to in this battle against the titular aliens. Lots of cheats too, especially when it comes to multiplayer. This is the sort of game you pull off the shelf when you're with a bunch of people, and no one's exactly going to complain a whole lot. Either pick up a controller and get into the multiplayer, or, I don't know, have a Wicked Blue and read your copy of Nuts magazine. Because that's what everyone did in 2002, didn't they? Does anyone remember Sophie Howard? Eh? Eh? Oh, don't get too many of those till a payday. Sorry, I'm getting off topic here. Time Splitters 2. Very good.
Hey.
We have a bunch of generally okay Bond games from this generation, whether they feature an ancient Sean Connery trying to reprise his role in a film that occurred 40 years previously, or a more contemporary Pierce Brosnan affair. In fact, the PS2 did manage to last long enough to get a Daniel Craig Bond game, in the shape of Quantum of Solace. Still, of all the various Bond games on PS2, Nightfire is definitely my favourite. Its predecessor, Agent Under Fire, was a generally okay title, but Nightfire betters it in every department. While this wouldn't necessarily go down as an all-time or of an FPS in the same way that something like GoldenEye would, time has a lot to do with that obviously, Nightfire's got a lot of good blasting, as well as enough appropriate fun with gadgets to make you feel like Bond. And if Brosnan's Bond was about anything at all, it was about fiddling with John Cleese's elaborate gadgets. That didn't necessarily make for the best Bond films, but it does make for some decent Bond games. The wonderful thing about the PS2 is that you can ask people to name games that they'd like to talk about from the platform, not necessarily the big hitters, but the sentimental favourites, and you'll get tons of answers. Not just a couple of dozen names that continually crop up, but easily over 100 different titles that sound like they're worth a look. I remember looking at such a thread and seeing someone champion 2003's Downhill Domination, a game that I'd not heard of at all previously, thinking that it sounded very worthwhile, and what do you know? It most certainly is. This is proper good arcade-style racing where you get on your mountain bike and scream down those big hills at ridiculous speeds, picking up power-ups and even weapons to help you along, as well as doing the odd trick here and there. There's a little smacking of SSX here, only without the snow I suppose, but more games like that aren't exactly a bad thing, and there's also even a little bit of road rash in here. Simulations are totally good, and we are going to see some cracking examples of that later on, but sometimes you just want to throw reality completely out of the window and do the sort of ludicrous antics you can perform in this game. Check it out. Bullet hell shooters. There's lots of those to be found on PS2, and if you know me, then you know damn well that I love a good bullet hell shooter. We have a few entries for the shmup in the top 100, and the first is Successor's Psyvariar, a 2000 arcade that hit the PS2 in 2003, and it did actually get a release in Europe, which is nice. The gimmick in Psyvariar sounds positively illegal, seeing as it's all about getting a buzz. You increase your buzz by getting your ship's weak spot very close to the enemy's bullets, and if you get it up high enough you can become invulnerable for a short time. I'm not necessarily good at bullet hell games, but the main thing I seek out with them is the adrenaline rush that comes from facing these outrageous attack patterns. So a game that actively rewards you for paintbrushing those beefy bullet curtains is obviously going to get 2 thumbs up from me. If you love bullet hell as much as I do, this is definitely a game for you. Here's a big hitter. Admittedly, it's a series I don't actually have huge amounts of experience with. I must confess, only played the original Devil May Cry. However, that doesn't mean I don't enjoy this very successful original 2001 introduction to the world of Dante. His shocking white hair, his pistols, his fancy sword waving, his ultra cool antics in both cutscenes and gameplay. Admittedly, it took me some time, and I perhaps don't enjoy this title as much as some other people do. To be honest, I didn't like it at all back in the day, but I can also respect the fact that there's a good few games that we'll be seeing later on in this list that wouldn't be around without the original DMC, whether they're later works by the almighty Hideki Kamiya or otherwise. It is quite undeniably a monster, and even if it's got fixed angles, that's not a deal breaker for me. I like fixed angles and tank controls. Sue me. Sure, one day I will get around to playing the game that almost everyone agrees is the best in the series, Devil May Cry 3. I fancy that would get a pretty big reception from me, but hey ho, what can I say? Again, you can't play absolutely everything. I'm sure you'll still rinse me in the comments though, and I'm all for that. Appropriately enough, here is another high-profile series of games for which I have only played one entry. I haven't played Naughty Dog's much-loved original Jak and Daxter, but I have played its 2003 sequel, Jak 2 Renegade. In fact, I have 2 copies of Jak 2 Renegade in my PS2 collection, for no other reason aside from me being a complete moron who forgot about the first one they had. Jak 2 Renegade is both a fun artifact of the time, as well as being a 3D platformer that still plays very well. This is the edgy sequel to the first game, which to my understanding was a very nice, bright and cute affair. However, Jak 2 is snarling, grey, punky and I want some motherfucking chocolate milk, adding a whole load of darkness and even a bit of GTA-inspired open world action because that's what Naughty Dog thought the audience wanted. And hey, the game was a hit, so they weren't exactly on about that. Jak 2 is far from the only edgy sequel in this era, and it is definitely one of the better ones. Even if Jak now perpetually snarls like he's about to go off to his room and listen to Linkin Park, Daxter is still there to provide the laughs, and the platforming, the combat, the occasional driving and exploring. Yep, that's all done to an absolute turn, just as you would expect from those misbehaving hounds. Midway always had a great line in arcade sports games that played well and also had a good sense of humour, usually because they didn't give a toss about the rules. NBA Jam, NFL Blitz. Red Card isn't as well known as either of those games, but it's the Midway take on football. The sort of game where you could just do a regular sliding tackle, but a spinning kick straight to the chest is usually more effective. Bashing opponents builds up your power meters, which you can then use for a boost, either big bursts of speed or even nastier tackles, and the obligatory super shot if you fill that meter up to the max, the one that's likely to send the goalie into the back of the net along with the ball. Oh, and you can also play against strange teams filled with dolphins and the like, along with more regular ones. Again, you just don't get footy games like this anymore, do you? I suppose this is quite similar to FIFA Street, but Red Card is that little bit better.
And he panics at the finish line, sending the ball way off target. Ball still in play. Things... And the fans go
Another game that didn't exactly set the Western world on fire is next. The Nightmare of Rygar is Eureka's 2004 take on Namco's legendary series, mixing it up with Chunsoft's Mystery Dungeon, the popular series of console roguelikes that included Pokemon games, Chocobo games, Shiren the Wanderer, and so on. Considering the original Tower of Rygar's legendary status in Japan as a groundbreaking arcade game and huge influence on the whole JRPG genre, Babylon is a very appropriate setting for a mystery dungeon title, and back when I did a video all about Golden Age arcade games getting revived on PS2, I had a lot of fun with this one. I like a good roguelike, I enjoy a good mystery dungeon type affair, and so yeah, this is a good one for me. Easier to get into than the original Tower of Rygar, it must be said. It didn't get any love at all from reviewers in the West, obviously, but really gave as much of a toss about what IGN thought of the game back then as we do now. There's another wholly ignored Japanese roguelike coming in a few entries' time, but you should give this one a go. Def Jam Vendetta was already good enough to get on the top 100 in its own right, but the sequel, yeah, it's definitely better. Def Jam Fight for NY keeps the almighty Aki at the helm, which can only be a good thing. It adds a whole bunch of characters, an actively interesting story, and crucially, much better stages. The general controls and gameplay is still great, same as it was in Vendetta, but Fight for NY's big improvement is in the stages. This is now a brawl outside the ring, filled with foreign objects and environmental set pieces that you can use, and the game is all the better for it. Like, imagine WCW Backstage Assault, only 1 with Def Jam rappers and 2 really freaking good. In a nutshell, that's Def Jam Fight for NY, and when you've got Ludacris, Busta Rhymes, NORE and Fat Joe going at it, compressing necks against brick walls with suplexes and trying to push each other in front of the freaking subway, frankly, it's hard to see anything wrong with it. Here's another cool game I picked up when I was looking at Golden Age PS2 revivals. We're back with McRae, and this is 2001's Spy Hunter. In a world where vehicular action games are pretty damn popular, one of the genre's granddaddies came in to do damage, and the result is really good. In the main, the cool thing here is that you can go through each stage in a whole load of different ways, creating a full-on line of tricks the same way you would in a Tony Hawk game. There may well be a plot kicking around, but really, this is all about scoring as best as you can, and that makes for a pretty freaking great update of a classic arcade. You do get some crap examples of that in the PS2 era, the likes of Space Invaders Invasion Day and what have you, but Midway absolutely nailed this one, bringing Spy Hunter right back to the modern day in killer fashion. The second game's more of the same and damn good too, so this is kind of an entry for both of those titles. As for the third game that stars The Rock and was meant to promote a movie that never actually happened, this is most certainly not an entry for that title. You already know that I love a good wrestling game, and if it's a good pro-res game, well, all the better. This is Spike's King of Colosseum 2 from 2004, a game that, well, when I first heard about it back in the day, I had to play, even if it never ended up coming out in the West. Spike are, of course, the brains behind the almighty Fire Pro series, no surprise to say we'll be seeing one of those games later, and King of Colosseum is their 3D take on the genre. Unlike most Fire Pro games, this one actually comes with licensed wrestlers, with the big three of ProRes, New Japan, All Japan and Pro Wrestling Noah, all fully represented alongside freelancers, legends and so on. The game has a slightly different grappling system to what you would find in Fire Pro, one that's still based around timing, but features a whole load of different positions and also uses a powerball system. You use the powerballs for big moves, which is kind of a cool feature as it means that you don't simply spam the huge head drops willy-nilly, and the build and pace of a match feels accurate as a result. It's much more of a simulation of pro wrestling than SmackDown is, although both have their major positives. If you're not one for ProRes, then this probably isn't going to mean a whole lot to you, but the PS2 was a great console for serving up games in all kinds of niches, no matter how obscure, and that's another reason why I absolutely love it. And just like that, we are back in the console roguelike niche. If the Nightmare of Rygar is the sort of relatively easygoing affair that you can happily dip your toes into, something like Baroque is a game where your head gets shoved right into the water and you're made to scream the name of the Lord and Saviour. This came out in 2007, it's a remake of an old Saturn game from 1998, and it's a thoroughly unforgiving roguelike. The sort where your health just goes down all the time and there's nothing you can do about it, filled with ridiculous and completely obtuse mechanics, a somewhat unsettling and oppressive atmosphere, monsters that are generally an awful lot tougher than you. This is not a game that's here to play nice, and even if it is quite a late game, I still can't believe it got any kind of Western release. Savage though this game may be, there is something about it. A mood, a pull, an intangible something that makes you persevere, even if the game frankly does not like you. Again, the reviewers at the time obviously hated it, but Baroque is nowadays a poster child for PS2 games that have a major cult following, and it most certainly deserves a spot. Unlike the last game, you're not going to find too many people who don't like The Warriors by Rockstar. This 2005 game came at a time when all sorts of classic movies were being revived and given the video game treatment. The Godfather, Scarface, Reservoir Dogs, the cancelled Taxi Driver. Not all of those old flicks were a perfect fit for a video game, although a film where a gang that's accused of a murder they didn't commit have to fight their way through all sorts of other gangs in the slums of 70s New York City, just so they can get back to their home on Coney Island? Yeah, there's no problem with this one fitting in. Battling the baseball furies, Lizzies, orphans and so on with your gang is pretty cool, and with this being Rockstar, there's naturally a whole load of other extra things you can do. Tagging up turf, training, mugging, arcade games. It's a very cool fighting game that's really great at building a world where the grime and dirt comes from attention to detail and a love for the game's inspiration, as opposed to simply making everything a shade of turd brown and saying fuck a lot. Final Fight Streetwise, I'm looking at you. Anyway, get those beer bottles on your fingers, start clacking them together, and come out to play this game, I guess. That last bit doesn't really work.
Supposed to write with no spray. Jeez.
Those who don't help go to hell.
Fucking way, man. I got someone in my sights.
Here's another really good FPS, as well as another game that didn't exactly do well on its initial release. Ubisoft's 13 from 2003 is a jolly good bit of spy thrilling action. The graphics are obviously the main thing people remember about this one. It's all done in a comic book style, everything lovely and cel-shaded, complete with big words on the screen that represent footsteps, moans, groans and the like. This alone is enough for the game to be interesting, and the gameplay isn't too bad either. People kinda bagged on that part of 13 a lot back then, but I think it fares better than the likes of Red Faction. Again, the PS2 generally isn't the best place for first-person shooters when it comes to this generation. We don't really have any Halo beaters or anything like that. But the amnesiac James Bond-esque conspiracy-tastic plot and the lovely stylings are enough to drive this game along. Here's another sort of sandbox affair, although it is a much lighter game than the ones we've previously seen. This is the Simpsons Hit and Run, one of the very best Simpsons licensed games. Indeed, it's one of around 2 or 3 decent ones if we're being honest. One that's mainly based around driving Springfield and its various landmarks, interacting with all the characters, finding all kinds of shortcuts. It turned out that driving was a much better way of getting The Simpsons into a video game than all the various utterly mediocre to crap platformers that had previously spewed forth in past generations. The Crazy Taxi-esque Road Rage was a nice test run here, but this is the big one. And when it comes to being not just a Simpsons game, but a Simpsons game in 3D, well, it really manages to surpass even the most generous expectations. It's a long jump from this back to Simpsons wrestling.
Oh, out of control! No! Woohoo! Eat my duck!
Sega do a good line in sports games featuring their characters, especially when Sheffield's own Sumo Digital are also involved. So while Virtua Tennis 2 is a pretty fine time on PS2, I thought it would be best to give a space to Sega Superstars Tennis, which has got similarly really freaking good tennis play, but with the addition of Sonic, Beat, Ulala, II and various other Sega characters, including the more legendary likes of Gilius Thunderhead and Alex Kidd. Plus you've got plenty of appropriate stages and special moves for each characters. The detail here is pretty spot on, just as it is in later Sumo and Sega efforts like the All-Stars Racing games, and there's not a whole lot to fault on the tennis front if you'll pardon the exceptionally weak and obvious tennis-based pun. It could perhaps be argued that this is really a 7th generation game considering that it came out in 2008, and it is also available for the 360, PS3 and Wii, but this PS2 version is really freaking good too. It's where I first played it, and it looks just fine on here.
Free love.
Onimusha 2. Again, this is the only entry in this series that I've played, but it's a whole load of feudal Japan action, complete with the nice pre-rendered backgrounds, fixed angles and tank controls that are straight out of Resident Evil. Lovely stuff. I hadn't played this game for many years before revisiting it again recently, and it's still a damn good one. I always enjoy this sort of setting. It's very cool when you manage to get an attack chain going, the plot and the characters are fantastic, you do essentially get to play as Toshiro Mifune as he goes from village to village on a quest against the ruthless Nobunaga and his demon army. It's a great game, and it is cool to see that the series is going to be making a comeback. I suppose that's not too surprising considering how successful certain other feudal Japan type games have been in recent years, but hopefully the new Onimusha will be a good one. We're back with Koei again, we're back in 2nd century China, but no, it is still not Dynasty Warriors. In fact, this is the Mother series. Romance of the Three Kingdoms 8 came out in 2002, finally getting a European release in 2004. More strategy action? A game that's primarily made out of menus? It doesn't seem like the sort of thing you'd usually go for on PS2, but then I fell in love with the 3rd romance game back in the day on Mega Drive, and when the almighty Fat Rab and Fat Ryan over at Consolevania made me aware that the 8th game was available on PS2, I simply had to get it. And happily, I wasn't disappointed. The core of these games has pretty much always been the same. They may not be lookers, but they represent the fullest game version of the Chronicles of the Three Kingdoms, a place where you can do anything and take literally any part you want to, from being a ruler to a vassal, all the way down to an officer and even starting with frickin' nothing, looking for a city to make your own. You can start at various points in the timeline, do all the city management, and of course, you gradually prepare for battle. It's certainly not straight into the action, seeing as you've really got to get your troops ready, set up alliances and reinforcements from friends and all that, try and disrupt your target with bouts of espionage. But that's all part of the intrigue, and there's not many other games for me, certainly not on PS2, that really give that sort of hit, where the political wranglings are just as engaging as the battles themselves. Bloody brilliant. At the time of release, R-Type Final was supposed to be the legendary shoot 'em up series' final battle, one last showdown against the almighty Bido. Of course, it did turn out to be a bit of a Terry Funk-esque retirement, seeing as it was only a couple of years before R-Type returned, but this is a pretty great shooter. It's not as if R-Type had any trouble going through the generations and adapting to 3D. Everything you would expect out of IOM's brand of exceptionally hard arcade shmupping is here, from suitably horrific boss battles, enemies coming at you from all directions and tight passages that you will definitely have to squeeze through, and it also represents a fine tribute to everything that the series achieved, with a whole load of ships that you can unlock from every other R-Type game. Of all the big shoot 'em up series, this one is nothing if not just utterly consistent, always operating at a high level. R-Type Final is just another very good looking and highly prickly feather in its cap. A lot of the regular EA Sports games in the PS2 era were, as mentioned already, not great. But here is a big exception. Golf! The PS2 Tiger Woods games were fantastic. You've got total control over the club with the right stick, you've got the game breaker meters, a bunch of silly fictional people to go along with all the real golfers, and most importantly, you've got the fantasy courses. It's totally fun to play one of these games and stroke your way around St Andrews, Pebble Beach, Bethpage Black or whatever, but the major challenge comes from courses like the Highlands, the Predator, Emerald Dragon, Greek Isles and Central Park. They're great to look at, they're often very creative, and they're usually pretty bloody hard. I played several Tiger Woods games a hell of a lot on PS2, building up a golfer from nothing, going through the various big modes like the Team Tour, or the one where you go back in time and face the likes of old Tom Morris and Ben Hogan. PGA Tour 07 is the one that I have stuck in here, but really, this is an entry for all of them. They're all good.
Should be in good shape after this. It's a long way to the cup from here.
Superhero games can always be tricky blighters, I feel. I guess that a trouble people have designing them is to figure out just how far they can go with a hero's powers. How do you do a Superman game and not make it comically unbalanced? Because, well, he's frickin' Superman. It's a hard one, especially with some guys. You'd think it might be a problem with someone like Incredible Hulk too, another virtually invincible character. But nah, not really. The people behind this game just ignored such potential issues, and the problem faded away. In Ultimate Destruction, you get to play the Hulk exactly as he should be. Dominant over everything, capable of destroying choppers with a car that he's thrown miles into the air, ridiculously athletic. You need an army to have even a little chance against him, and this is who you're playing as. And who boy is it a glorious thing. The pull of the game is right here in the title, as you destroy every single thing in your path, usually in scarily powerful and highly satisfying fashion. And because Radical Entertainment didn't in any way compromise the power of the Hulk, they ended up making one of the best superhero adaptations of the generation. Here's another studio that's well known for games about superheroes, although in actual fact this is the only game by them not to feature any. This is Rocksteady's first game, and it's 2006's Urban Chaos Riot Response. This is a great and underrated FPS, although it is a game that's very much of its time. Everything about the plot and the characters smacks of something like America's 10 Most Wanted, aka Fugitive Hunter War on Terror, Only this game is actually bloody good. You play as veteran Pink Floyd drummer Nick Mason. Okay, not really, but that is the character's name. And you lead a unit called Team Zero, defending your city against a gang called the Burners. The big thing here is your riot shield, something that you'll need to use a lot to contend with the millions of Molotovs that get thrown at you. And then the rest of it, well, it's such glorious style. Slow motion headshots, uploading entire clips into guys who are already dead and setting them on fire, ragdolls aplenty. It is that strange post 9/11 entertainment type thing, I think. You get a fair bit of that on PS2, and Right Response is an example of that sort of perpetual catharsis. Not as big as something like 24 is, but it's there. And in this game it's rather entertaining, filled with great shootouts, much more going on than simply being in cover a lot. Not a big success at the time, but Rocksteady would then don the batsuit and go on to much greater things. It is perhaps fair to say that early adopters of the PS2 did get a little itchy in those first few months, waiting for the really big guns to show up, particularly the one that was at one point supposed to launch the system, but did end up getting delayed. That being, of course, Gran Turismo 3 A-Spec. Happily, it's not a game that disappointed people. It certainly didn't disappoint when it comes to sales numbers, considering it's the console's second most successful game, with nearly 15 million copies, and it's a belter on the track. Again, Sony and Polyphony didn't really need to do anything stupid or outlandish here. They needed to produce a souped-up new GT with plenty of courses, something that's got everything from the big simulation mode that you can spend many hours in, to being able just to pick it up and have a quick race. And yeah, that's what they did, in their absolute droves. I mainly enjoy this game for a quick couple of races here and there, but it's still bloody great when I do that. And as far as racing sims go on consoles, well, it is pretty important, isn't it? I mean, you'd know if it weren't here. Here's a bit of music game action from the almighty Harmonix. Now, I didn't really get into Guitar Hero type games until the next generation, admittedly, but Amplitude is a little preview of what Harmonix are going to achieve with the likes of Rock Band. A game where you are the producer and you've got to build a song by repeating patterns, tracking each instrument in the process, keeping them alive, finding the right line for a huge combo. It would be really freaking funny if this is how producing worked in real life, it must be said. George R.R. Martin calmly humming to himself as he mans his beat blaster, getting the power up that's really going to make Paul McCartney's bass swing. The music in Amplitude is the sort that fits the game completely. Take that how you will. It's a very nice visualisation of the tracks, just the sort of aesthetic you want from a game in this era. Yeah, it's a definite winner. Now, I know already that there is one major thing people will complain about with regards to this list, as it is often a weak point for me. The amount of RPGs. I know that the PS2 is a pretty popular platform for JRPGs especially. There are tons of them, including a whole lot of the best loved games in the genre. The Persona games, Suikoden, Shadow Hearts. There's a lot. And unfortunately I simply haven't played many of them, something that I know I should fix. I do like the ones that I have played, mind you, and I have played a good chunk of Square's Kingdom Hearts. Not that this is a hugely obscure one or anything, again, it's a huge seller. I find this one kind of fascinating really because, well, imagine if Kingdom Hearts wasn't around and instead they tried to get this series started today. Surely it would never bloody happen. Disney has always been difficult with regard to their IPs, they've only gotten worse over the years, so how on earth would Square have pulled it off? They'd have never been able to use such huge established characters with basically no restrictions, the same way that they did here. For that, it easily deserves a spot on this list, and it certainly helps that mechanics-wise, it's a lovely playing RPG that's got a different take on things, rather than the usual active time battle format. You can kinda see how Nomura and company's game impacted Square's future RPGs pretty significantly. Great game. Ridge Racer 5 takes us right back to the beginnings of the PS2. It's 2000 and we're smack bang in Ridge City. As ever, the driving is great. I love how easy it is to drift round corners, and it's especially cool when you use that to pass someone. Now of course you can do that in all sorts of racing games, so perhaps it isn't all that special, but sod it. Drifting around corners and passing one or two cars at the same time is one of the great feelings to be found in all games, doing something that it would otherwise be pretty bloody difficult to achieve in real life. Ridge Racer 5 gives you that sort of feeling on tap, and that's enough for me to love it. Just as with the original game, it's a fantastic way to launch the new console, to quite literally put the pedal to the metal, open up the taps, and see just what this baby can do. The music and the MC also helps. I mean, it wouldn't exactly be Ridge Racer without those things, after all.
We've got the perfect weather conditions for a Grand Prix today.
We're still in the early days of the PS2, still in 2000, and yes, it's time for Dynasty Warriors 2. While it's technically more a relation to the first game as opposed to a full sequel, the Western name of the game did present this as a somewhat drastic change in direction, one where we go from a simple one-on-one weapons-based fighter to a whole new form, where you're slashing your way through hundreds of enemy soldiers, playing your own part in a massive battle, responding to new tactics, earning some glory after a big duel with a rival general. It undoubtedly had a huge influence, and this first game in the world of Musou is still one of my favourites in it. You either love this sort of thing or you don't, but I really enjoy getting stuck into those crowds of enemies. It feels like you're riding a big old wave at times, always controlling the crowds, always moving forward. It works pretty bloody well for me. I mean, I love the old school arcade type of beat 'em up. This is the same thing, only on a much bigger scale, so of course it's going to scratch a particular itch for me. Our hat trick of very early, basically launch PS2 titles from 2000 concludes with the beautiful and underrated Sky Odyssey. We've had the simple joy of racing, the simple joy of fighting in crowds, and now we have the simple joy of flying. Pilot Twins PS2 edition. This isn't a flying game that's full of enemies that you need to shoot down, as much as that's usually a good time. This is a game of exploration, making your way through tight ravines, avoiding rockfalls, occasionally having to refuel mid-flight by latching onto a train, all while some absolutely beautiful orchestral music plays. Sure, it does look like a very early game, but I find this to be wonderfully charming, similar in a way to Namco's almighty Prop Cycle, something where the flying is at just the right level, not overly simplistic, but not so complex that you can barely get off the ground. It is perhaps one of the least known of the PS2's launch titles, not exactly something that set the world afire even back in 2000, but over 25 years down the road, it still deserves a look. It feels appropriate after 3 straight games from 2000 that we jump forward a few years and go to something that's really pushing the PS2 to its limits. And so here's God of War from 2005. It is kind of a rare beast, I suppose, seeing as usually the games that tend to get loads of praise in this big old action beat-em-up genre are Japanese. But then here comes the Santa Monica studio with this absolute whopper of a game where you play as a perpetually pissed off warrior who uses his blades on chains to mutilate every single thing that breathes air. Nothing is safe from Kratos. Cool hero aside, this has got it all going on. It shows just how far the PS2 had come, pretty well looking like it could have happily come from the new generation's consoles that were just around the corner, and having the play to match that. Hell, even the QuickTime events aren't annoying, and we've obviously got the difficulty level that you would want from such a game. You wouldn't want this to be smooth sailing after all, would you? We are now getting in just about into the second half of this list, and yep, the standard is pretty freaking high. We're back in bullet hell land, and we're finally seeing the kings of the genre. It is, of course, the almighty Cave. Several of Cave's arcade shmups hit the PS2, and while unfortunately none of them got Western versions, they still got plenty of love amongst the dedicated ones. The hardcore, as Gamesville would call them. I imagine there's a good few people who got their PS2s modded, flip-topped and swap-magicked up so that they could play DoDonPachi Daiyuju. Why, it's such a good Danmaku game that it's more than worth slicing into your PS2 with a slide tool for. DoDonPachi has always been one of my favourites, it's the game that got me into bullet hell shmups after all, and this is brilliant, also coming with a whole load of extra modes in its PS2 incarnation, including the Death Label mode, which may just be a boss rush, but it most certainly sounds freaking cool as all hell. Again, if you like this genre then playing this is simply a must. You've probably long figured out by now that I have a particular predilection for more actiony games, especially ones that involve pointy weapons and slashing. Here's one that's got a bit of a different feel from the likes of God of War, mind you. The Mark of Cree from 2002 is another Western action title, one with plenty of touches all of its own. The aesthetic here, filled with Polynesian influence, isn't really like any other title. The system of scanning enemies and assigning attack buttons to them is actually ingenious and still feels like a lovely, modern and fluid thing. It's very cool using a bird that flies from point to point and acts as your third eye. The action's as intense as you'll find in many other titles, but the Mark of Cree's special little quirks really help make it a good one. It's held up brilliantly, and it's still wholly worth playing nowadays. We're sticking with action, a place where we've already had some of the biggest names on the system appear. We've had Dante, we've had Kratos, and now we've got Gact. If you don't know, Gact is a J-pop icon, a whopping huge name in the 2000s and still very much active now. As far as video games go, he's most famous for appearing in the FF7 spin-offs Crisis Core and Dirge of Cerberus. However, he also has a game all of his own, and that's Taito's Bujingai from 2003, the game where Gact is futuristic swordsman Lao Wan. This isn't a game that got much attention at all in the West, not a patch on Devil May Cry, not even near the level of something like the Mark of Cree, but I love this one. Again, I was made aware of this game by Consolvania. It's a bit more of a simpler affair than some other slashers on the control front, more based on timing as opposed to fancy button combos, but the absolute ridiculous level of action that happens when swords clash together, it's gorgeous. Just like one of those Japanese animes, as Otacon would probably say. It's a very easy game to pick up, but also challenging to play at a high level. It is actually possible to take that combo chain well into the hundreds if you're good enough, if you've got the timing and the talent. I'm certainly not there, but it's a hell of a thing to watch. There's never really been any doubt as to the game that's the poster boy for the sort of weirdness that can be found all over the PlayStation 2. It is of course the game that escaped containment and rolled its way over to the West, picking up everyone and everything in front of it, a labour of love for its creator that took a few years to complete and was met with a whole load of friction, criticism and lack of understanding from people along the way, but, well, what an end result. Namco's Katamari Damacy, the brainchild of Keita Takahashi, is worthy of every last bit of love it's gotten over the years. It especially got embraced in the States, actually more so than it originally was in Japan. Of course Europe did kinda get screwed a bit here, as even despite the game's success in the US, there still wasn't a PAL version, although the sequels did come out in this territory. Anyway, there's not a whole lot to really understand here. The prince must use the Katamari to clean up the kin of all Cosmos' drunken mess, collecting the rubbish he's made out of the galaxy, starting as small as anything, eventually becoming big enough to pick up mountains and form an entire star. The weird premise and the big dollop of humour is one thing, but that only goes so far. We still remember and love Katamari Damacy primarily because it's an all-time great puzzler and the gameplay is absolutely spot on. It does a lot more than simply make you laugh or say that it's all so random and surreal. It's a monster of a game, ingenious in every department. We need to come down a little after that last bout of weirdness. So, a nice bit of rallying will do the trick, and for that you can always depend on Codemasters and the games licensed by the late great Scottish champion Colin McRae. Colin McRae Rally 3 is my favourite of these on PS2. Of course it's not exactly fixing a whole lot from its immediate predecessor, number 2 on the PS1, but not a whole lot really needed fixing. It was already an exceptional rally game, and all that really needed to happen for this first PS2 instalment was for the graphics to get the obvious boost and all the other technical hoo-ah. It doesn't really need to offer a whole lot besides this fabulous level of rallying, the nice dulcet tones of someone calmly going, "Alright over crest, titans do not cut," and so on as you're trying to go as fast as you can round all these corners. A great rallying game like this one is intense, and yet also oddly relaxing. Some kind of bag on this, seeing as there's only your car on the track, but then that's the beauty of it. No other cars to worry about, it's you against the course. If you screw it up, well, you only have yourself to blame. By this time, Codemasters were really getting a reputation as one of the best racing game studios out there, something of an evolution for the old darlings, the previous masters of Dizzy the Egg and all that. Mind you, the best game of theirs is still to come in this list.
Into crest and long 4 right. And 3 left over crest, 30. 6 left over jump, straight 70. And care big jump and long 2 right, tighter.
More action. Actually, this is a bit more of a roaming around Metroidvania-ish type game, and it's one that takes its cue from an old arcade classic. This is Rygar, the legendary adventure, a brilliant revival from Tecmo that takes its cue from the more adventurous NES Rygar game and updates this fantastical icon so very well. It's a Ray Harryhausen type adventure where you swing around various disc armours, using light and heavy attack based controls that should be pretty familiar seeing as they appear in so many other PS2 action games, taking some utterly breathtaking surroundings, and there are fixed camera angles too. Some people may not like these, hell, I didn't use to all that much, but now I embrace them, and they certainly allow you to see the best parts about this wonderful world, even if they can occasionally make the controls a little irritating. Hardly a negative really, not when compared to all the things here that are really freaking good. Also, while I love a good old action-packed level as much as anyone, it is nice to have something with a bit more exploring going on. Absolutely one that needs playing. Here's a more actiony RPG that I do think is very good indeed. Something that's perhaps a little bit similar to Kingdom Hearts on the gameplay front, but the graphics and the exploration here is much more my sort of bag. It's Level 5's Dark Cloud 2. Max's adventure does take a while to get properly going and doesn't exactly have the best voice acting, but never mind. The story, in which a town being something of a walled garden that can neither be entered or left is taken to a logical conclusion, is a very good one, and it's all filled with plenty of nice touches. Enjoyable dungeon bashing, going to town on enemies with a wrench, actually having a different and more involved levelling up system rather than all the stats simply going up an arbitrary amount. Also, those cel-shaded graphics are lovely. Something about cel shading and the PS2 really hits the spot, and we're going to see a bit of that in another RPG that's on the way. Is that too much of a spoiler? Probably. But in any case, this is damn good stuff. We've got some more flying, and here we've got a game that, again, really doesn't have much in the way of equivalence. 2001's Skygunner is a very special title, a flying game with a steampunk aesthetic, albeit one that's certainly brighter than what you often see from the style. It's all in the skies, and it's filled with some thoroughly magnificent flying machines. The flying here's got a similar appeal to Sky Odyssey, where it's complex without being too hard to pick up, but the combat does naturally add something, especially when it's really based around being incredibly daring and acrobatic, pulling off all sorts of rolls and loop-de-loops, making sharp turns, getting as close as you can to big enemy ships in order to strafe them and take out all their weaponry. It's a beautiful game indeed, and it's also a very entertaining one. Naturally, the premise of the game did mean that it was pretty well ignored at the time of its release, but it's deservedly built up a cult following over the years. If you look at lists or videos all about PS2's hidden gems, chances are pretty good that this game's going to be on there. And in those same lists and videos all about PS2 hidden gems, well, the chances are also good that this next game is going to be right up at the top of those lists. Sega's 2004 game Blood Will Tell is the poster child of hidden PS2 gems, a game that did virtually nothing on release, but now, a copy of this game is worth ludicrous amounts of money, it seems. The premise and style goes a long way here, as it's pretty brilliant. An adaptation of a manga called Dororo, in which our hero has had nearly all of his body stolen by a group of fiends, and naturally, he wants to get it back. This all comes with some amusingly cheesy cutscenes and voice acting, of course, but the premise and story is really good, and it factors in very nicely with the gameplay, even right at the beginning, where you don't get to see in colour until you get back your eyes. I must say, this first part looked so cool that I almost wish there were an option to just not get your eyes back and play the whole thing in black and white. Action-wise, it's pretty damn good too. There's more than enough on the gameplay sides to keep anyone going. Is the game worth all those piles of money to play? Well, that's a whole other kettle of fish, but there are other ways and means. PCSX2 is a very good thing. So, what's the first thing that you got with your PS2? Actually, I imagine a lot of people probably ended up getting some DVDs to play on their new console first, as it was such a relatively cheap player for the time. But I think it's fair to say that Tekken Tag Tournament was the leader of the PS2's launch titles. Another entry into the almighty King of Iron Fist lineage, only with a whole new twist that should be quite obvious from the title. You've got over 30 characters to make teams out of, and you can tag your partner in whenever you're up and ready to fight. Oh, and unlike some other tag-based games, if one of you gets knocked out, both of you lose. I greatly prefer this as it does add a fair bit of risk to proceedings, especially considering how Tekken works, where one move can easily lead to you getting crushed and losing damn near your whole health bar without being able to answer back. Oh yeah, and there is also the Tekken Bowl. Some people probably love that minigame more than they love the fighting itself, although obviously you do have to unlock it first. We do naturally have a bit more Tekken to come in this countdown, but this is an excellent spin-off. Another much-loved series steps up, and it's time to hit the powder. It's SSX3, another EA Sports big gem, and probably the most loved snowboarding game of them all. Although to be honest, I am pretty sure that the only other games that could really compete with it are the other titles in the SSX series. SSX3 wins out for me mainly because of the big open world aspect, something that a lot of other extreme sports games have tried to emulate. However, there is a bit more of a nice balance here between having that big open world to screw around in, and also having really great courses and races to actually play when you're ready to stop poking about and looking for secrets. That, and like all the really great extreme sports games, is the sort of thing that you never really forget how to play. It doesn't matter how tricky the controls are, once you've got it, it doesn't really leave you, and you soon pick up on those great lines all over again. Just glorious comfort gaming. We've already had Gran Turismo 3, and so obviously we've got Gran Turismo 4. It does make a lot of sense to include them both, really. Gran Turismo 3 was basically a delayed launch title for the PS2, whereas Gran Turismo 4 arrives with the system at the height of its powers. And yet, there's a pretty big difference between them. All the numbers are certainly larger, over 700 cars and just over 50 tracks, and the graphics have taken quite the major step forward, with the PS2 being pushed to its very limit. All the cars, not to mention the real circuits, are freaking dead on as well, down to the last detail. It does say a lot when a certain loudmouthed petrolhead journalist said that he'd driven almost all of the 700 cars in the game in real life, and he couldn't come up with any more than a couple of minor faults in how well the vehicles were recreated in GT4. It is certainly a game that deserves tons of respect, seeing as I am not sure that any other PS2 title manages to pack quite so much inside a single DVD, and the sales, well, they were freaking massive again, the 4th best selling game on the whole system. The list would perhaps be incomplete if this game wasn't here. Although as it happens, there is another driving sim out there that, for me, leaves Gran Turismo 4 in the dust, as huge as it is. As for what that game is, well, you'll have to stick around to find out. The PS2 is home to some absolutely beautiful examples of 2D gaming, and perhaps none are quite as gorgeous as Atlas and Vanillaware's Odin Sphere from 2007. It's a different sort of game too, an action RPG, but one that takes place purely from a side-scrolling perspective, filled with the sort of moves that you would expect more from a beat-em-up. You've got a strong story, a bunch of characters to play as, and various other little quirks that come with a game like this. Something that, like a lot of other really good PS2 titles, is doing some major experimenting, going way off the beaten path when it comes to typical RPG gameplay. While I have mentioned already that I don't have huge amounts of experience with the PS2's RPGs, it was well worth having a crack at this one. For a quite late PS2 game, not to mention a 2D one, it actually did pretty well on the sales front as well. Sometimes you just can't keep a high quality game down, and Odin Sphere is most definitely one of those. R-Type Final was a pretty great entry into a classic shoot-em-up series, but here we have an even better one, Gradius 5. Treasure get in there, take up the Vic Viper's mantle, and they make what is quite possibly the definitive Gradius title. Treasure do put a fair bit of their own spicy touches on it, but this is still very much in the Gradius formula. You can have just about any power-up chain you want, picking whatever you think's going to be best against all these alien ships. Whatever it is, you're most certainly going to need it because the difficulty is very true indeed to the Gradius standard. However, it's worth it. This is stunning, a beautiful shooter that couldn't play any better, the amazing boss battles and set pieces you'd expect from Treasure thrown into the mix. It is everything a Gradius game should be. Easily one of the best shmups on the system. Another great licensed game is next, and another that absolutely nailed a superhero. Trey Archer's Spider-Man 2 wasn't the first great Spider-Man game or anything, but it's a title that set up a wonderful formula, one that influenced lots of other superhero games. Of course, you've got the missions and the story and so on following the plot of the movie, but really the main appeal is simply swinging around New York. Once you get a hand of the web system, you can do some great things and, of course, you can go around helping people out, doing everything from stopping muggers to picking up a child's balloon. Spider-Man 2 makes you absolutely feel like you are Spider-Man, and it's a great game to just drop into for a bit, chill out and swinging, going from the top of skyscrapers all the way down to the street just to punch some villains about and get a bag for somebody. Lovely. Right, let's get scared. Unsurprisingly, we have 2 Silent Hill games on this list, and yes, the first one of those to appear is Silent Hill 3. It's fair to say that after the second game, Konami and Team Silent had a pretty bloody tough act to follow, but they do manage to pull it off, creating something that fits in very nicely with the rest of this psychological nightmare, while naturally providing some good old honest frights. The beginning is pants-shittingly good, and it doesn't let up a whole lot from there. It's not quite as good as the game that preceded it, but Silent Hill 3 still represents this series basically at its peak, even if there was already signs of how easy things could end up getting screwed up. I do find it amusing that originally this was going to be a rail shooter, which would have been interesting. Happily, that didn't happen, and we got this excellent game instead. Now, Max Payne is a PC game first and foremost. It's not like it wasn't hugely successful there before it came to PS2, and indeed I would be lying if I said that the PS2 version was better than PC. Still, compared to the quite game yet not really there versions of the likes of Half-Life and Deus Ex, Max Payne on PS2 is a huge triumph, and it is where I played through the game. Aside from a bit more loading, everything from the original PC version is intact, and the third-person action, complete with all the bullet time, fits right in with the rest of the PS2's shooty titles. But of course the real winner here is the story, the atmosphere, and one of the best characters in video game history. I love the Max Payne games, well, 1 and 3 mostly, and the main reason for that simply is Max, and every last one of his noir-tastic lines. God bless Sam Lake and his grizzled face, and rest in peace to the brilliant James McCaffrey and his perfect voice. Here's my favourite shmup on PS2, and indeed one of my favourites ever. It's Cave once again, and this is 2005's Mushihime Sama. Why this one? Well, it's got a lovely brightness in the graphics for a start. I love the fantasy insect theme that this one's got going on, as it's certainly different to the usual space or city action. But in the main, it's simply the most intense bout of manic shooting I can think of. It's not necessarily trying to do anything wild in the combo department or feature any obtuse mechanics or something like that. It's just you against the bullets. All the bullets. Amazing music as well. The PS2 version, complete with a nice arrange mode, is fantastic. Even the odd little bit of slowdown doesn't hurt it all that much, and if anything it makes things a little bit easier and more dramatic when it does occur. This is a game that I simply had to play when I first saw videos of it, way back in the early days of YouTube when you could scarcely even make out the bullet patterns and the bitrate just threw its hands up and buggered off. And when I did, yep, it's another big reason why I'm very happy that I got my PS2 flip-topped, although again the biggest reason why is still to come. Soul Calibur 2 does have one thing to answer for, perhaps. It's one of the first fighting games, if not the first, to feature guest characters, coming over from completely different games. Heihachi from Tekken is in this PS2 version, for example, although admittedly the much bigger deal was Link making an appearance on GameCube. Looking at the state of fighting games today, some might not think the arrival of guest characters to be a good thing. But hey ho, Soul Calibur 2 is still bloody brilliant, for all the same reasons that the original Soul Calibur and Soul Blade were brilliant before it. The various new additions to the fighting, the soul charges and whatnot, fit in like a glove, and every other thing that makes these games so freaking great is still very much around. Oh, and there's a whole load of modes to chew over, stuff that'll keep you playing for an age. As far as weapons-based fighting action goes, I'm not sure that it gets all that much better than this, really. The original Klonoa Daughter Phantomily on PS1 is, honestly, one of the best platformers ever made. If I were to redo my all-time top 100, it would be very high up there. The sequel, 2001's Klonoa 2, Lunatea's Veil, isn't quite on that first game's level, but it's still a bloody good platformer. We've got fully 3D graphics this time out, but despite that the game hasn't changed all that much, which is a good thing. It's all still lovely, a gorgeous little dream world filled with gibberish, some very cool boss battles, various hidden things to find, puzzles that are actually engaging and plenty more good things besides. It's not exactly trying to be an ultra challenging platformer or anything like that, more something that's nice and relaxing, a world of illusion type game with plenty of opportunities to marvel at the world's beauty. Sadly, scarcely any bugger bought it at the time, which is frankly criminal, but this particular anthropomorphic cat-rabbit type thing most certainly has a bit of a cult following. Here we have the first appearance of Clover Studio, and it's not much of a spoiler to say that they'll be making a couple more before the list's done. Viewtiful Joe is admittedly something that most people would recognise as a GameCube title first and foremost, that is where it originally came out after all. But here is where I've played the game, and what a title is his. Seeing as good old Hideki Kamiya is at the helm, unsurprisingly the action is right out the top drawer, as frenetic as it gets with more than a little bit of bite, but as with all the Clover titles, the style is something else. A whopping big, gloriously cheesy hunk of tokusatsu magic, something where you're never going to guess what ridiculous things come in next, and it's going to keep you at it all the way through, from simply trying to get through the game to actually getting good at it and achieving a top grade. These Clover guys, yeah, they aren't too shabby. Here Comes the Pain is the definitive SmackDown game. Indeed, it will always be the definitive SmackDown game. I can say with a pretty high degree of confidence that nothing else Yuke's managed to do, and certainly nothing that 2K have done or will end up doing, is going to come close to it. This was the peak. What exactly made it so much better than Shut Your Mouth, which came right at the start of this list? We know the one thing in that game that is better, and it is a damn shame that you can't climb up the SmackDown fist anymore, at least not without putting in some codebreaker codes. But well, everything else is way better. You have so many more moves, proper submissions, the wrestlers are far superior and actually fight like their real-life equivalents, the backstage arenas are awesome, an even better roster with the addition of legends and tons of improvements to the creator wrestler, a really good story mode. It's got the lot, and you can even fly up in a helicopter to do a big aerial move, so there's still plenty of wild things that can be done. One of the best wrestling games ever, without a shadow of a doubt. Some would say that it's at best bold to make a game out of a film as revered as The Godfather. Most would say that it's stupid. I certainly remember a lot of people saying that back then, and I was more than a bit sceptical myself. And then, shockingly, I freaking loved it. I have played through this game a lot, and I think it's one of the most entertaining open world games of them all, definitely one of the best non-Rockstar ones. The shoehorning of a bunch of original characters into such a legendary story should be a disaster, and it does indeed bring the odd problem here and there, but it's still quite cool to play a part in that story, and have a few of the original actors reprising their parts: Robert Duvall, James Caan. There is even, in a little Easter egg, the very last performance of Marlon Brando. Still, a lot of the entertainment comes from this being one of the greatest arsehole simulators ever. The asshole physics, to use an old goon term, are off the charts. Going into businesses and extorting them in a whole load of different ways, using so many methods to intimidate the owner without making them go completely mad, having the world comment on your exploits. Amazing. Also, the gunplay is absolutely brilliant. I love having shootouts in this game, so taking over warehouses or compounds and fighting against the other families never gets old, and nor does the scrapping with its Fight Night-esque right stick movements. Being quite a late game, it is a bloody good looking title as well. A game based on The Godfather being this freaking good should be a sin, and yet Electronic Arts somehow managed to pull it off. At a time when other cinematic platform heroes like Lara Croft were busy not being strong enough and awkwardly falling off everything in sight, the original suddenly came roaring back to the top. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time is one of the best reboot games of them all, easily one of Ubisoft's best ever games. The Prince moves so good, parkouring all over the place through the most intricate jump sequences, with the ability to rewind time when he fails or simply say, that didn't happen, which I always think is one of the funniest ways to navigate a game over. The combat is speedy and super satisfying, the puzzles actually engage your brain. There's even an escort companion that you have through most of the game, and she's great, a superb and very capable character. Seriously, what a freaking comeback. Ubisoft, naturally being Ubisoft and specialising in screwing things up, did kinda make things weird with the rather overly edgy and godsmack-laden sequel to this game, but this game's brilliance did at least give them some slack for a change, and you can see that it influenced plenty other entries in the genre, from the Arkham games to, naturally, Ubisoft's own Assassin's Creed.
I soon discovered that when I had collected enough sand, the dagger gained the power to stop time.
I have only played one of the Ratchet and Clank games, I'm afraid. Good job it's bloody brilliant, meaning it's right up here in the list. This is up your arsenal, and of course it's Insomniac. These are the pure PlayStation guys, the guys who have pretty much been synonymous with Sony since their beginnings, and, well, while the PlayStation 2 doesn't exactly define itself with a traditional mascot that's as big as a Sonic or Mario or whatever, this alien robot tag team are pretty close to that, just as Spyro filled the same role on PS1. Up Your Arsenal sees the duo return to Ratchet's home planet in order to duke it out once again with the evil Dr. Nefarious, and the results are predictably brilliant. It's not exactly a surprising thing for Insomniac to make a game that's got every bit of tech and design done to an absolute turn, something so satisfying on the action and platform front that looks so damn good. All of that would certainly be enough to make Up Your Arsenal a very good game indeed, but the heroes having such charisma and personality is perhaps what makes it a true great. On top of everything else, it's really freaking funny, and you just want to keep playing as these guys. Insomniac have a freaking great knack for that sort of thing, and, well, I do hope that in these horrible times, they can keep going with that, and not get torn apart by their paymasters, like what's happened to so many of their other contemporaries. Tekken has a little bit of an odd arc in the PS2 era. As we've seen already, the series helps to launch the system with Tag Tournament, which is all well and good. Then we get 2002's Tekken 4. Admittedly, I've not played that one too much, but while it gets very good write-ups and still does very well in Japan, it is largely ignored in the West at the time because fighting games have seemingly temporarily fell out of favour, and it only sells a couple of million, actually causing Katsuhiro Harada to briefly leave Namco. Happily, he comes back after a year, and then, what do you know, Tekken 5 hits the PS2 in 2005, everyone loves fighting games again, everyone says that Tekken is back, and the game ends up being one of the PS2's top-selling titles, hitting nearly 10 million worldwide. All is well again. And Tekken 5 is indeed excellent. It's something of a back-to-the-roots game, removing some of the additions in Tekken 4 that people didn't like, having the usual array of game modes, a typically dramatic story, adding a bit of customization, even including the arcade versions of the original 3 Tekken games and a bit of Starblade as the game's loading. There's not much to complain about, really. Indeed, Tekken 5 does set up a pretty good base for the Iron Fist tournament going forward, one that's sustained the series for quite some time, certainly through to Tekken 7. No shock at all to say that this is one of the best fighting games available on the PS2, although it's not the highest placed one on this list. There is still another one to come. Back on the road now, and back with Rockstar. Midnight Club was another series that started when the PS2 launched in 2000, and here in 2006 we have the glorious peak of the series, Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition Remix. This is the oh-so-cool Fast and Furious Gone in 60 Seconds street racing answer to Gran Turismo 4. A whole load of different cars to trick out and pimp up exhibit style, 3 different cities to drive around in open world, taking on races as you please, as well as this remixed edition featuring Tokyo. It's not a part of the traditional career mode, but Tokyo previously featured in Midnight Club 2. There's plenty to be getting on with, a whole load of different racers, most of which are pretty great. For all the flair, the awesome graphics, the ability to cruise around in between races and so on, Midnight Club 3 reminds me mostly of a brilliant arcade racer, an evolution of the likes of San Francisco Rush, where the trappings of street racing, not necessarily being fixed to a circuit and what have you, means that the quest to find wild shortcuts in the races gets taken to a whole other dimension. After all, you can go anywhere you want in a race, even if that path is completely stupid. It may turn out not to be completely stupid if you make the right turn, find some wild leap or little snicket that takes you right into first place. Just be sure that you don't screw it up by crashing into a civvy or getting nicked by the police or whatever. In the end, it is another smash from the generation's aces. Shocking, I know. As far as flat-out creepiness goes, Fatal Frame 2 is pretty high up there. A tale of 2 sisters on their pleasant adventure through a quaint little village that's totally not abandoned and filled up with the restless spirits of long ago, taking all sorts of pictures with a camera obscura so that they can treasure the memories forever. It doesn't take a long time for this game to grip you, and it's got that classic style that, again, I love. I have no problem at all with tank controls and fixed camera angles, and Fatal Frame 2 uses them very well. I feel that they help a great deal with contributing that constant uneasiness, the feeling of never quite being in balance. And then you've got the camera obscura itself, something that is entirely the Fatal Frame series' own thing. Facing your fear head on, looking at it right in the eyes, and obviously being sure to take a decent picture. We don't want to cut the heads off these ghosts, after all. There's a lot of survival horror kicking around on PS2, but not many of them do it like Fatal Frame 2. Right from the start, this is a game that's liable to turn your pants as brown as the likes of Clive Barker's Jericho. From one mercurial Japanese game right to another. The first game that Fumito Ueda took the lead on, 2001's Eco. For a game that came out pretty early in the PS2's life, this is still a stunner to look at, which, more than anything else, shows just how accomplished Yoida's art direction is. The sheer scope and fantastical nature of this castle comes across so well, even with the clearly limited resources that Oida and his team had to play with. It is like a whole other evolution of the cinematic platformer genre, albeit one with more fluid controls than the norm, and one that really relies a lot on those visuals and the atmosphere for its storytelling, seeing as Ico and Yoda don't exactly have a lot of words to use. And again, it's another game that's mostly about escorting somebody, and yet that's never an issue. Never clunky, never irritating in the way that escorting someone often used to be in games. For a long time, this was the definition of a cult classic. Ico didn't exactly do a whole lot on original release, although it got some very good write-ups. Still, it's only increased in stature over the years, and you'll always find it on lists of the system's best. I fancy a fair bit of that has to do with Fumito Ueda's next game, which is obviously still ahead. Atmospheric and serene title? Why, with the most in-your-face, gloriously American and bloodthirsty shooting action you can get on the whole system, of course. As far as FPSs on PS2 goes, there's no real competition as to which one is best as far as I'm concerned. Criterion and EA's Black from 2006 is so far ahead of every other candidate, it's not even worth thinking about. Why is it? Well, it's certainly nothing to do with plot or great acting or anything like that, seeing as that's all designed to be as generic as possible. It's simply all about how excellent the gunplay is, every weapon feeling so impactful, shit blowing apart everywhere, the freaking amazing audio, the choir of guns that whips your head into effluence. Criterion essentially took the brilliance they'd achieved in their main series, that being Burnout of course, and they applied that to the FPS, the excellent results being there for all to see. Black is one of those PS2 games that easily feels like it could be a part of the next generation. But while it might have struggled in the technical stakes on something like the 360, it is the undisputed champion of big guns on PS2. It's Clover Studios again, and it's a game that's just about punching people. Of course, it's God Hand, one part of a final two-piece from the studio before they shut up shop and went on to form Platinum Games. This is the lighter affair, where Gene's rather fantastic alarm tends to get him in all sorts of trouble, but he's got the skills to get himself out of it. Well, so long as you don't mess things up. This is a tough game, but when it comes to sheer fighting, and most definitely the punching of people, I don't think there's anything better on the PS2 when it comes to what this specialises in. The system is so good, and when you're on top of things, bobbing and weaving, chaining all sorts of moves, getting the big attacks in, not losing your level, there's few things more satisfying on the system. It can be a bit intimidating at times, but it's worth the challenge, and the game generally being so funny, having such entertaining characters, not to mention the kick-ass Wild West style and music, makes it all the better. This isn't exactly the usual survival horror that Shinji Mikami's identified with, but he played an absolute belter with this one. The first Tony Hawk's game on PS2 happens to be my favourite one in the entire series. This third one just seems to put everything together perfectly, all the things that made this not just the best extreme sports game, but one of the best games full stop. Again, playing Tony Hawk is something that's basically in your bones once you get to grips with it. The old familiar tricks coming back, not to mention all the big lines. Mind you, I wasn't ever as good as that. My preference was simply to screw around in free skate mode, wheeling around the stages and trying to find all the little secrets. And so many of these stages are absolute classics. From the warehouse to San Francisco, Canada to Tokyo, Suburbia and the cruise ship. I can see them all in my mind so vividly, even if it's been an age since I've played the game. There's some great cheats too, and I love that Darth Maul and Wolverine are included. Why are they here? Well, just because. Someone obviously thought it would be cool to have them as secret characters. Can't really imagine that happening today, to be honest. What a game. The best fighting game on the PS2 is not, in fact, a Tekken game. Nor is it a Soul Calibur game, a Dead or Alive, or anything else. Instead, it's the original Big Daddy of the 3D fighters, coming roaring back to the top of the table. It's Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution. Sega's here, and they've smashed it. There's quite a lot of similarities between this and Tekken 5, to be honest. In both instances, the series was coming back from an instalment that could be considered a bit experimental, and not necessarily a big success in terms of sales. There is more here than simply going back to basics though. The new things that people generally liked were kept and improved, the old things people preferred came back better than ever, and there's some all-new additions that were universally loved. Especially in the case of Evolution, there's the Tournament Quest, a whole different take on single player where you are you. Going around arcades with your character, winning tournaments against other players and customising your chosen fighter. This was a time when customising characters in fighting games was pretty unusual, so this was hugely influential, and it helps make this a truly legendary fighting game. I still think as well that with all the tutorials that this has to offer, this is absolutely essential if you want to really get into the mechanics and principles of being good at fighting games. That's what this is all about, and I don't think many other fighting games have been as effective in this department. I suppose you would expect that if there was going to be one traditional style JRPG that gets a high spot in this list, it would be one of the Final Fantasy games. However, shocking confession, I actually haven't played them. I know. I will hopefully get around to them someday. I'm sure I will. Still, I have played Dragon Quest VIII, and I'm so glad I did. It perhaps wouldn't have been something that I picked up, but once I saw those graphics and how the game looked, I simply had to. It's a traditional sort of Dragon Quest game, of course. No ye olde English in the translation, but a very classic RPG setting and plot, and this has to be one of the very best examples of that. What a wonderful world it is. There's few PS2 games that I absolutely marvelled at more than this one. The cel-shaded look is one thing, but the animation and the massive amount of character in every little move and gesture, just awesome. Every character is brilliant too, and comes complete with some of the best voice acting around. Squeenix got a proper good cast of mostly British actors together for this one, and that's much appreciated. Now, admittedly this is the only Dragon Quest game I've properly played. That probably doesn't come as much of a surprise, but this does seem to me to be the best one in most people's eyes, so I clearly made the right choice. Clover Studios are back again with another game that boggles the mind. In the West, God Hand and Okami came out at damn near the exact same time. The first was Shinji Mikami's take on the classic beat-em-up, and Okami was Hideki Kamiya's spin on Zelda, one that's mixed up with all sorts of Japanese mythology that creates a look entirely of its own, something that I don't think any other game has even dared to emulate in the 20 years since this game came out. Oh, and there's also a mechanic in the shape of the Celestial Brush that, again, is so unique to this game, something that's used both to create and destroy in equal measure. It's such a different style of play, and yet the game is so well made that it makes perfect sense immediately, becomes such a joy to use. This sort of playful experimentation, one flourish after another, that's what the Clover Studios games are all about, but when you look around, well, it's something you got so regularly on PS2, games that were still willing to take so many risks, and those risks paying off. Okami is one of the definitive examples of that, so obviously a big place on this list is warranted. Again, like Viewtiful Joe before, I should recognise that Resident Evil 4 came out on the GameCube first. It had about 10 months of exclusivity before finally us very eager PS2 folk could get our hands on it. You almost have to feel for the poor GameCube here. It snares one of the greatest games ever, but it couldn't quite keep its hands fully on it. Anyway, Resi 4 hardly needs much in the way of justifying, being that it's the game that changed survival horror completely, turned the whole series on its head, mixed the scares with a level of action that we hadn't seen before, and had a pretty huge impact on, well, everything, really. This is one of the most influential and important games of the 21st century. Legacy aside, it's still something that hits very hard. That freaking opening village sequence alone, desperately trying to fight and live in this horrorscape of enraged ganados, especially one that happens to be wielding a chainsaw, will forever be one of gaming's most intense moments, and it doesn't exactly go down a whole lot from there. Not even when the escort appears and, once again, is actually not a pain in the arse. Everything that could be an irritant simply isn't. Puzzles, boss battles, quick time events. It just gets the whole lot right. And even if not everyone necessarily took the right lessons from Resi 4, including Capcom themselves, that doesn't change this game being basically untouchable. Jeez, suddenly they're all really freaking important games. Grand Theft Auto 3 is actually, for me, a really freaking hard one to rank. I don't think it's out there to say that this is the single most important game on PS2 and the most important game of the generation. Rockstar changed absolutely everything. Simple as that. With GTA 3, they'd found the key to unlock the sort of game that people only dreamed about previously. They'd actually pulled off a full city, a sandbox that you can do seemingly whatever you want in. The old top-down GTA games had that promise about them, but no one quite realised just what that was going to be like in 3D until GTA 3 came out. It wasn't even all that hyped beforehand, and it only really became clear just what Rockstar had achieved with this game when it actually hit the shelves. Overnight, a series that was largely known for shock value became the hottest thing gaming had ever seen, the undisputed champion, and the leader of the whole form that everyone wanted to emulate. By all rights, it should probably be higher than number 14. The only reason it isn't is because this is a list of favourites and, well, Rockstar weren't exactly done after creating GTA 3. Not by a long chalk. Next, well, it might just be my favourite arcade racing game ever. OutRun 2 is glorious, of course. It recreates every single thing that people loved about the original, and then goes ahead and adds even more. The drifting, the slipstreams, the rivals, and so on. OutRun 2006 Coast to Coast is the definitive version of a game that kind of feels like something of a coda for, maybe not even just arcade racing games, but the arcades in general, as they used to be. The days when the arcades were all about the latest and most technically brilliant games are kind of gone, but here's one last classic before the clock reaches midnight. Anyway, there's tons of meat in this home version. All the tracks and cars from the original OutRun 2 and SP, plus a bit more added on, the different racing modes, various goodies to unlock, a big sort of career mode. All of it is fantastic, no matter how much time you want to spend with it. Drifting ridiculously around those big corners in all these Ferraris with your girlfriend to some of the best video game music ever simply isn't ever going to get old. And now, here's Bully. I suppose that technically, being from the UK, I should be calling this game Canis Canem Edit, but obviously I'm not going to be doing that. What was presented by the UK press as some potentially horrific GTA-type game only with school kids is instead probably Rockstar's brightest and lightest game. A classic American school romp with all the stereotypes pulled off to a turn, and something that actually feels like an updated and even better version of the legendary Spectrum title School Days. Something where you've got a story to go through and a whole load of side missions and the like, but you've also got to try and stick to the timetable, make the curfew, and attend the lessons. Aside from not getting in trouble, it also makes Lil Jimmy Hopkins smarter. Naturally, there's plenty of opportunities to be a little bastard, but it is certainly not GTA. It's a hilarious game, marvellously acted with a great story, and it has possibly got the best bass lines in video game music history. There is no way to go wrong with this one.
Hey, stop!
I heard Hopkins play. Hey! What?
I am sure a lot of people would say that either Gran Turismo 3 or 4 is the best racing sim on the PS2, and there's nothing wrong with that. But nah, this is the one for me. TOCA 3 is my absolute favourite PS2 racing sim, and it might well be the best game that Codemasters has ever released. I'm afraid that poor old Dizzy and Seymour can't really compete with this one. So why TOCA 3 over Gran Turismo? Much like the GT games, or indeed Forza Motorsport on Xbox, this is also trying to do everything. Open wheel, rally, vintage, oval, off-road, damn near any type of racing you can think of, and you get to do just about all of it in the brilliant career mode, complete with hundreds of cars. Something about this just feels so much more proper though, rougher, dirtier, like actual racing. I think a lot of it does have to do with vehicles actually taking damage here. If there is one thing that I do think is a negative on the PS2 GT games, it is that they treat the cars like priceless ornaments, and you don't really feel the bumps and shunts on the track so much. Here, you most certainly do. This may not have the amazing graphical shine, but it's not exactly a slouch in that department, and it just feels so real. All the detail, all the scratches, all the dirt, the whole lot. This was my favourite racing simulator ever for a long time, until it was finally dethroned by Forza Horizon 4, and it is still pretty easily my number 2.
You're really flying.
As we hit the top 10, we do actually have one more chance to hit the road. I said that Outrun 2006 was the best arcade racing game, and I just said that TOCA 3 was the best racing simulator, but where exactly does Burnout 3 land? It doesn't fit neatly into either category, really. It's obviously a more arcadey experience, but not in the classic vein of Outrun. No, this is more about destruction, and what we end up with is possibly the single best concentrated blast of gameplay that's available on the system. For a series that got its start in the early days of the 6th generation, Criterion's game came so far in just a couple of go-rounds, but when you get to here and you get the introduction of the takedown, purposefully smashing the crap out of rival cars to get ahead, using nitrous to grind them against a wall, or ramming and sending them absolutely flying off into the back of Beyond, that's where Burnout becomes an all-timer. It's not exactly deep, of course. We literally have a mode called Crash, which is simply launching your vehicle into a junction and causing as much damage as possible, even using Aftertouch to really maximise the pain. But I can think of fewer things in gaming that's more entertaining than taking a race on and bashing other cars, especially if it's the Road Rage mode where you've just got to do that as much as you can. It's casual brilliance, something you can happily do over and over just for the purposes of entertainment. We have a lot of lovely stories on PS2, special experiences, deep games, a whole load of emotions, but sometimes you just want car to go bang. It's an intense sort of stress relief. Guess what? Yes, we have a football game in the top 10. I am sure there are still people who would balk at the sight of an old 3D football game being so high up the list, but if I didn't have Pro Evolution Soccer 4 in my top 10, well, I wouldn't be being true to myself. For those who are unfamiliar, Pro Evo was the absolute champion in this generation. FIFA wasn't even remotely close, and nor was anything else. More than that though, Konami had mastered the beautiful game. Pro Evolution Soccer was already pretty much the best around from its first incarnation on PS1, but it had improved dramatically with each instalment. And here is my pick for its peak, or at least the one that I played the most. Pro Evos 5 and 6 are also very close to it, and picking them is justifiable for all the same reasons. This is easily the best 3D football game ever. It's not just that the recreation of football is so accurate, it's that it's also incredibly fun. They certainly don't forget that in the course of getting all the details down. As far as play goes, it hasn't aged a day, and it is light years ahead of any modern football game. The latest utterly sorry, microtransaction-packed, bugged and bloated eFootball and EAFC games still cannot lace up this game's boots. And if you are concerned about playing with footballers from the noughties, there's still plenty of people out there updating the rosters for the modern day. All this and the frickin' Master League, Castolo, Valony, Ivarov and company, fueled up on hot Pepsi from the gaffer and ready to go? It doesn't get any better than that. Even though FIFA did end up getting good again in the next generation, even the great likes of FIFA's 10 and 11 weren't up to this colossus. As far as pure football goes, this is only beaten by Sensible World of Soccer, and that's about as high a praise as I can give.
Head it clear. Plays a long ball out to the right. Tries one. Oh, what a goal! They can't lose this one now. They're cruising.
A year after Grand Theft Auto 3 became the leading light of the 6th generation, Rockstar North came back again to show that not only was it not a fluke, but that they could do something even better. It's not as if this game needs a whole load more effusive praise, seeing as it's yet another juggernaut that's amongst the PS2's best-selling titles, but it turns out that more Grand Theft Auto, but with a big old 80s Scarface and Miami Vice tinged coat of paint, a much more expansive plot complete with a protagonist who can actually talk, and a whole load more cool things to do that make you feel like you're building up a proper criminal empire, well, Grand Theft Auto Vice City was exactly what everyone wanted. Whether it's chasing some goon around in a golf cart, riding a motorbike up a building so that you can get the perfect light for the skin flick you're back in, picking up love juice for a deranged Scottish hair metal band, or simply cruising around on a boat to self-control, it's the frickin' best. It was a point where honestly, I wasn't sure if gaming was ever going to get any better, as this clearly had all I could ever possibly need. Hell, I could just listen to the frickin' talk radio stations for an age. Even that was awesome. Surely GTA couldn't get any better. Could it? Well, we're going from one highly excessive period piece slap bang into another. Only this time we're not cruising on speedboats, we're having long intense codec conversations about the finer points of camouflage, CQC, the Cold War and the meaning of the battlefield. Metal Gear Solid 3 getting such a high spot shouldn't be a shocker, whether it's in the original Snake Eater form or here in its upgraded 2006 Subsistence Edition. This is just about the ultimate stealth game, the one where no stone was left unturned. You don't have a radar, but you do have a whole load of camo options to obsess over, plenty of gadgets that you can mess about with, various animals to kill so you can eat them to keep your strength up, even engaging in a twisted sort of cannibalism if you've lured some poor guard into getting munched on beforehand, a load of close combat options, and a whole frickin' environment to use to your advantage. In lesser hands, this game could be the definition of not being able to see the Soviet jungle for the trees. But of course, this is Hideo Kojima, and the results are simply unreal. Excessively long cutscenes, ripping apart the fourth wall, musings on every last tangent, set pieces and boss battles that are like no other game. It's outrageously brilliant, and I'm here for every last bit of it. And of course, there's that theme, which doesn't even require any notes. That's just a perfect 10. Once upon a time, there was an internet games show called Consolvania, made by two Glaswegians from the Rulmuck forums who thought that the likes of Sky TV's Gamesville were a load of wank, and with naught but a mic on a coat hanger and a dream, they made something better. I've mentioned it a couple of times on the list already, and it's still active on YouTube today. One of the hosts, a man named Robert Florence, loved games by Curry, and most of all he loved a game called Gitaroo Man, which was referenced repeatedly on the show. You've not experienced the glories of mid-noughties internet antics until you've seen Legend, the American Xbox champion who beat Lisa Simpson 45 in a Mecha Soul deathmatch, belting out the legendary theme to a group of bemused drunken Scots on a Saturday night. I loved the show, and several of the games on this list are ones that I first played entirely thanks to them. Bujingai, Romance of the Three Kingdoms 8, Urban Chaos, Klonoa 2, but none of the Vania games captured my heart as much as Gitaroo Man. Or, to give it its proper title, fucking Gitaroo Man. Released by Curry in 2001 and developed by music game maestros Innis, this is a battle where you defend yourself by pressing the right button at the right time, then attack with whopping great leads that you hit the button to trigger, then guide with the analog stick, like the old Fairground Buzzwire game. The battles are brilliant, the visuals are wonderful, and the music, well, that's just plain special. It probably wouldn't work out too well if the music was crap, and thankfully, this has one of the best soundtracks ever. Sure, the plot's a little bit goofy, but when that legendary theme properly kicks in, oh, my heart, my frickin' heart. This sort of thing is exactly why I love gaming, and this will always go down as one of my favourites. Up next, we have the game that I simply had to soft mod my PS2 for. Being a game fan and a pro res fan, I already knew that Fire Pro Wrestling was the best series around, and I'd played X Premium on the SNES and the GBA games. They were a labour of love for the guys at Spike and earlier Human, where hundreds of the best wrestlers were available and you could create tons more. It didn't have the big looks or the pizzazz or whatever, but that simply didn't matter a jot. Not when the end result feels so much like a simulation of wrestling, where the matches play out just as they would in real life. Although Fire Pro Wrestling Returns did actually end up getting a Western release, such a thing didn't seem likely in 2005. And so, one online trip to the almighty Lixan later, as well as some other place for the purchase of a flip top and a copy of Swap Magic, not to mention the small matter of not screwing up the installation, and there we go. It is safe to say that of all the games on this list, this is easily the one I spent the most time on. Downloading many an edit pack from the awesome folks at Fire Pro Club, getting familiar with the menus through the beautifully done translation guides to the point where I could just about edit a wrestler myself, running tournaments, doing mock federations, simming literally thousands of matches, because I'm the sort of utter nerd who wants the computer version of Mitsuharu Misawa to wrestle exactly like the real Finn. Now this may be the most niche Finn of them all, completely out there in every regard, red flagged for die-hard wrestling fans like yours truly. But I put thousands of hours into this. I basically burnt out a laser on this freaking game. To not have it in my top 5 would be absolutely criminal. Now, you probably have a firm idea of the 4 games that are remaining, I would imagine. So, it's a question of order. And in at number 4, we have Fumito Ueda's second game, a late arrival to the system that almost flew in the face of the brand new next-gen machines, taking the PS2 somewhere that didn't seem possible. To look at some of the early games we've covered here, say Sky Odyssey, and then go to this? Surely it's a different system. For as much as already has been said about Shadow of the Colossus, how it's still one of the main cornerstones of the whole games are art debate and whatnot, how really it's much more of a puzzle game than it is a boss rush, how the game actually makes you feel about climbing up on these gigantic beasts, wondering just why you're doing what you're doing, I do mainly love still just how the game plunks you here in this barren world with almost no direction, aside from that gleaming light from your sword. Already at this point, games were pretty strong on making sure you go exactly where you need to go. Here the experiment is to give you, if not absolutely nothing, then the bare minimum. And yet it still works out beautifully, and that feeling when you stumble upon the first Colossus? Good lord. At its heart, Shadow of the Colossus always seems meta to me, as if it's mainly about the process of creating games, of building a collection of tasks for the player, usually a load of smaller tasks that lead up to a big one. But what if those small tasks weren't there? If you just didn't have them? Does it still work? By all accounts, Oido and the team resisted no end of temptation to put some other creatures in the world, a bit more meat on the exploration, surely just a little something in there for Christ's sake, a bloody NPC or two even, just someone you can talk to. And yet they persisted, they kept to the vision. And when the orchestral music swells up, when Wanda's hanging on for dear life so high up, clawing to get some purchase and finally get into that crucial spot, you see how it absolutely worked. It's hard not to talk about Shadow of the Colossus without getting somewhat wanky, but it is still unquestionably a game, and an absolutely freaking incredible one at that. Few games hyped up the arrival of the PS2 more than Metal Gear Solid 2. As I recall, details on MGS2 were one of the first things that I remember being revealed with regards to the sort of games we were going to get on it. And of course, it wasn't a launch title. Not even close, in fact. In the US, a full year passed between the launch of the PS2 and the arrival of MGS2, with it being closer to 18 months for both Japan and Europe. And of course there was a big delay in that time, a whole bunch of last minute changes having to be made after 9/11. Still, this is to me the pinnacle of tactical espionage action. Metal Gear Solid 2 is nowadays my favourite game in the whole series. It doesn't quite go into the absolutely wild details of stealth that MGS3 did, but the story of the game, the whole pack of characters including basically all my most memorable side ones, Vamp, Fatman and Fortune, the much hated at the time but clearly incredible switch from the tanker to the whole world that is the Big Shell, how it all descends into the most special kind of meta madness, each and every breathtaking moment and boss fight, from the Harrier to Naked Raiden, Arsenal gear and New York itself. When I think of Metal Gear Solid, I think of this game first. As a sequel, it's bold as hell, yet not quite as fully unhinged as things would get later on. Still an absolutely ripping yarn that's easy enough to follow. Indeed, it may well be Kojima's best plot, certainly the MGS game that's still the most relevant, to the point of being almost eerie at times. As a sequel to what was already one of the best games ever, it wasn't just worth waiting for, it managed to surpass it. I loved it then, but I love this even more now.
There's someone else here. Set back up ASAP.
The final choice in this list was, as ever, a close one, Finn. This time between two incredibly different games. I'm sure I made the right choice in the end, the one that I definitely make 9 times out of 10. But Silent Hill 2 is a very worthy runner-up. It's another powerful story after all, one of the most powerful and one of the most mature ones that we've ever had in games. To see how Konami and Team Silent managed to handle such difficult themes, things that so many other games would disastrously fumble over both now and then, still wows me to this day. The game itself, walking around those restless dreams, the town filled with fog, it's a special kind of atmosphere, the sort that modern attempts at the game can't quite recreate, almost like they can't help but be too clean, too flashy. There's James himself. If there was a negative people would always say about this game, it's that the combat is crap and hitting monsters can be frustrating. Usually it's better if he runs away from most enemies, and only takes monsters on when there's no other option. I feel that's what you're supposed to do, to be honest, as James is just a normal guy at the end of the day. And geez, those creatures still give me the major creeps. The mannequins, the nurses. It all contributes to an especially oppressive mood, not to mention the main creature of the whole piece, the iconic Pyramid Head. Every little detail builds up that mood. Akira Yamaoka's soundtrack is so different to what you usually find in games, even the somewhat stilted nature of the interactions between people. I mean, sure, it may well just be slightly weak voice acting, but that doesn't matter. There is really so much to say, so much to try and piece together when it comes to Silent Hill 2, so much more than just a paragraph. Unbelievably, it's 25 years since this game first came out, and it is still treated with a reverence that even the most successful of old titles cannot reach, as if this was the high watermark of storytelling in video games, of world building or whatever. The point where the rave broke and rolled back, where we're always trying to get back to, and we're touching those red squares and trying to remember how we got there in the first place. Does it deserve to be that intimidating a creation? I suppose for something that is so psychological and such a battle of guilt and regret, it's a fitting position to be in. And here we are. It's kind of a rare thing, but the PS2 is a platform where there is just about a universal agreement on the top game. There aren't many lists of the best games on the platform that don't have Grand Theft Auto San Andreas right at the top. It's got the popular vote too. By far the best-selling game on the PS2, with over 17 million copies sold, a couple of million ahead of Gran Turismo 3. And yeah, it's the top game for me. It may be the blindingly obvious choice, but sometimes that's the way it is. The third 3D GTA is of course a lot more than simply the previous two games with a Boys in the Hood early 90s gangster setting. It's a gigantic achievement, where naturally you can do all the things that made 3 and Vice City so great, but somehow there's even more. Way more. When the game reveals its true scope once you get out of Los Santos and into the countryside, it is quite something. The shootouts and cop chasers, the brilliant storyline that's filled with superstar actors and so many of the best characters in the whole series, Truth, Tenpenny, Ryder, Smoke, Torino and many more, the addition of so many new mechanics such as being able to shape CJ exactly how you want or get some followers to back you up, the huge amount of minigames and side quests, but even all that may not necessarily be the big pull of this game. That may well just be getting on a bike and taking a ride. Not a chase, but a ride. Taking in Los Santos, San Fierro and Las Venturas, all the different areas that are so chock full of personality within each city, getting into the different chatter as day turns to night, jamming to all the great songs on the radio, and perhaps finishing it all up with a big old ride up Mount Chiliad, flying off the ramp into the sky and seeing if you can stick the landing. If you can see it, you can go to it. By bike, by boat, by plane, hell, even by jetpack. The best times I've had in this game, in the hundreds of hours that I've played it over several go-rounds, has been that exploration, still finding odd little things in a game where the roads and landmarks are virtually etched onto my corneas at this point. From putting big money down on the blackjack at Caligula's to playing pool at 10 Green Bottles, trucking in Bone County to street racing in Vinewood, fighting ballers in Glen Park to surveying your personal airfield full of craft in Verdant Meadows, looking at the whole empire that you have built, this is without question the best GTA, and it is one of the very best games of them all. And that's it. It's all done. Hopefully you've enjoyed this massive Top 100. This is a project that I've been thinking about off and on for years now, more so than any of the other lists, probably why it's ended up so much bigger than all of them. I suppose I could have just virtually chucked them all out at once, giving them just a few seconds of gameplay each and be done in 10 minutes. No shade to anything like that, but well, that's not my style, especially not for a console that I love as much as the PlayStation 2. If you've watched this to the end, hopefully you won't mind me saying that if you've enjoyed this, then there's plenty more to be found on my channel. So do give it the old subscription, like the video, hit the bell and all that. I don't usually say that sort of thing, but that is the nature of the YouTube beast. But now, at last, my PS2 Top 100 beast is finally fed. Thanks for watching, and until the next time, bye for now.